I stood by the bar, nursing my whiskey as the corporate party buzzed around me. The grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel was filled with laughter, dim lights, and the occasional awkward dance move. I felt like an outsider, a spectator at someone else's celebration. My eyes scanned the room, eventually landing on Jessica, my wife. She looked stunning in her red dress, radiating confidence and charm. She was the center of attention, her laugh loud and carefree. But tonight, there was something different about her, a sparkle in her eyes that wasn't meant for me. My chest tightened as I followed her gaze across the room. It landed on Brad, her colleague. They shared a glance, a secret smile, the kind of smile that made my stomach churn. "Hey Josh, you all right?" Greg, my coworker, clapped me on the shoulder, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, forcing a smile. Greg nodded, distracted by the sight of Jessica and Brad now whispering closely. "Man, those two are something, huh? Always so close. You sure everything's cool?" I gritted my teeth and nodded, unable to tear my eyes away from them. "Yeah, they're just friends." But the way Brad touched her arm, the way she leaned into him, told a different story. Memories of late-night meetings and hushed phone calls flashed through my mind. I finished my drink, deciding it was time to confront her and end this charade. As I made my way through the crowd, Jessica and Brad slipped out a side door. Panic rose within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I followed them outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. Rounding the corner, I saw them locked in a passionate kiss. My world shattered. "Jessica!" I yelled. She pulled away, eyes wide with shock and guilt. "You're coming home with me now," I demanded, my voice cold even to my own ears. Brad stepped forward, trying to play the hero. "Josh, calm down. It's not what it looks like." "Shut up," I snapped, fury boiling over. "Jessica, get in the car." But she didn't move. Instead, she took Brad's hand. "I'm sorry, Josh. I'm leaving with him." They walked away, and I was left standing there, feeling a mix of anger and humiliation. I drove home in a haze, the road a blur through my tears. By the time I reached the house, my sadness had transformed into a cold, hard rage. I stormed inside, heading straight for the bedroom. Yanking open the closet doors, I grabbed handfuls of Jessica's clothes and threw them into a heap on the floor. Dresses, shoes, jewelry, everything she cherished, I tossed into the hallway. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but in my state, I answered it anyway. "Josh," a woman's voice said, shaky but determined. "It's Linda, Brad's wife." I froze, the room spinning. "What do you want?" I demanded. "I know what happened tonight," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm as devastated as you are, but please, don't do anything rash. I have a plan." "A plan?" "To destroy them, to make them pay for what they've done to us." I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the pile of Jessica's belongings scattered around me. Part of me wanted to finish what I started, to burn every last reminder of her betrayal. But Linda's words echoed in my mind. Maybe there was another way. A way to make them face the consequences of their actions. "All right," I said, my voice steadying. "I'm listening." The drive home felt like a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and anger. The whiskey from earlier mixed with my raw emotions, creating a storm inside me. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I didn't even remember the trip. Slamming the car door shut, I stormed into the house, my heart pounding with rage. The silence inside felt deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. I headed straight for the bedroom, my fists clenched. Jessica's clothes hung neatly in the closet, mocking me with their orderliness. I yanked them out, throwing dresses, shoes, and jewelry into a heap on the floor. It felt good to destroy something, even if it was just her wardrobe. The more I threw, the more I wanted to tear everything apart. "Don't do anything rash. I have a plan." "A plan?" I echoed, disbelief creeping into my voice. "Yes, a plan to destroy them," she replied, a fierce determination in her tone. "To make them pay for what they've done to us." I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the pile of Jessica's belongings scattered around me. Part of me wanted to finish what I started, to burn every last reminder of her betrayal. But Linda's words echoed in my mind. Maybe there was another way. A way to make them face the consequences of their actions. "All right," I said, my voice steadying. "I'm listening." The next morning, I met Linda at Café Luna. She was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her face pale and drawn. As I approached, she looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and sadness. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's get this over with," I replied, sitting down opposite her. "What's your plan?" "We're going to expose them," she said, leaning forward. "We'll gather evidence, enough to ruin their careers, their reputations, everything." I nodded slowly, the wheels turning in my mind. "How do we start?" "We start by playing their game," she said. "We'll make them think everything is fine. We'll gather evidence, and when the time is right, we'll strike." Over the next few days, Linda and I worked tirelessly, gathering evidence. We cloned their phones, intercepted their messages. At first it was mundane stuff. Work, dinner plans. But then the conversations took a darker turn. Jessica and Brad's affair was laid bare, every detail. Late one evening, my phone buzzed with a new message from Linda. "Meet me at the usual spot. Urgent," it read. I grabbed my keys and headed out, my heart pounding. When I arrived at the cafe, Linda was already there, her face etched with worry. "We've got a problem," she said as I slid into the booth opposite her. "Brad is planning to take Jessica on a trip. If they leave, it'll be harder to keep tabs on them." "Do you have a plan?" I asked, my voice tense. Linda nodded, pulling out a folder from her bag. "We need to get into their phones. If we can access their messages, we'll have all the proof we need." "How do we do that?" I asked, skeptical. "I have a friend, Nate. He's good with this kind of stuff. He can clone their phones, but we need to get close enough to them," she explained. As we strategized, the enormity of what we were about to do hit me. We were stepping into dangerous territory, but there was no turning back now. We had to see this through for our own sanity. The next day, Linda and I executed our plan. I approached Brad at work, striking up a conversation about a new project. As I distracted him, Linda slipped past and cloned his phone. The tension was unbearable, but it worked. "Did it go well?" I asked Linda when we met in the elevator afterward. "Perfectly," she whispered, a triumphant smile on her face. "Now we wait." Over the next few days, the messages started rolling in. At first, it was just mundane stuff, but soon, the real dirt began to surface. Jessica and Brad were not only cheating, but also plotting to undermine their colleagues at work. The more we found, the deeper the conspiracy seemed to go. Finally, we had enough evidence. It was time to confront them. The night of the gala arrived, and the tension was palpable. I dressed in my best suit, every detail meticulously planned. Linda and I arrived separately, blending in with the crowd. As the evening progressed, Jessica and Brad were the picture of blissful ignorance. I made my way to the stage, the folder of evidence tucked under my arm. The room hushed as I began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have something important to share," I began, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "Tonight, I bring to light a betrayal that goes beyond personal pain. It's about trust and how easily it can be shattered." I read aloud the messages, each word a nail in their coffin. Jessica's face turned white, Brad's expression hardening into one of anger and fear. "This is just the beginning," I continued, my voice rising. "We have more, so much more. You've betrayed our trust, and now you'll face the consequences." The room erupted into chaos. People whispered and shouted, Cameras flashed as everyone tried to capture the moment. Jessica and Brad stood frozen, their world crumbling around them. Linda stepped up beside me, her voice strong and clear. "They thought they could get away with it," she said, "but they were wrong." As security escorted them out, I felt a sense of vindication. It wasn't over yet, but this was a step towards justice. Linda and I had come too far to back down now. We had to see this through to the end. The next morning, I woke up feeling the weight of the plan Linda and I had set in motion. The confrontation at the gala had only been the beginning. Now we had to play the long game, gather more evidence, and ensure that Jessica and Brad faced the full extent of their actions. I met Linda at Café Luna again. She was already seated in our usual corner, sipping a cup of coffee. As I approached, she looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and exhaustion. "Morning," I greeted, sliding into the booth opposite her. "Morning," she replied, her voice steady. "We need to move quickly. Brad mentioned something about taking Jessica on a trip. If they leave, it'll be harder to keep tabs on them." I nodded, feeling the urgency. "What's the plan?" Linda pulled out a small device from her bag. "This is a phone cloner. We need to get close enough to them to use it. Once we clone their phones, we'll have access to all their messages and calls." "How do we get close enough?" I asked, my mind racing. "We'll need to be clever about it," she said, leaning forward. "Brad's office is our best bet. I can create a distraction while you clone his phone." It was risky, but we didn't have many options. We had to act fast. Later that day, we executed our plan. I approached Brad at work, striking up a conversation about a new project. "Hey, Brad," I said, forcing a smile. "Got a minute to talk about the new project? I've got a few ideas I wanted to run by you." Brad glanced at his watch, hesitating. "Sure, Josh. Come on in." As I launched into my spiel about the project, I positioned myself between him and the door, giving Linda the opportunity to slip past unnoticed. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady, pretending to be engrossed in the conversation. Linda texted me a few minutes later, "Done." I wrapped up the conversation with Brad, my nerves finally starting to settle. "Thanks for your time, Brad. I'll follow up with you later." "No problem, Josh," he replied, distracted. "Good ideas." I met Linda in the elevator, her expression triumphant. "We did it," she whispered, a sense of relief washing over us both. "Now what?" I asked, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. "Now we wait," she replied. "The software will send us copies of their messages. It's only a matter of time before we have everything we need." Over the next few days, the messages started rolling in. At first, it was just mundane stuff. Work plans, dinner reservations, meaningless chatter. But then the conversations took a darker turn. Jessica and Brad's affair was laid bare, every detail exposed. They talked about their late-night meetings, their plans to undermine colleagues at work, and even their dreams of running away together. One evening, Linda and I met at the cafe again, poring over the latest batch of messages. "Look at this," Linda said, pointing to her laptop screen. "They're planning to embezzle funds from the company. They think no one will notice because they're covering their tracks through multiple accounts." I shook my head, disbelief mingling with anger. They've gone too far. This isn't just about their affair anymore. They're committing serious crimes. "We need to gather more evidence," Linda said, determination hardening her voice. "We need to catch them in the act." The next day, we devised a plan to intercept their financial transactions. Linda's friend Nate, who had helped us clone the phones, was an expert in cybersecurity. He guided us through the process of tracking their movements and gathering concrete evidence. As we pieced together the puzzle, it became clear just how deep Jessica and Brad's betrayal went. They weren't just cheating on us. They were betraying everyone around them, stealing from the company, and manipulating their colleagues. Finally, we had enough evidence. It was time to confront them once more, this time with the full weight of their actions laid bare. The night of the second gala arrived, and the tension was palpable. I dressed in my best suit, every detail meticulously planned. Linda and I arrived separately, blending in with the crowd. As the evening progressed, Jessica and Brad were the picture of blissful ignorance. I made my way to the stage, the folder of evidence tucked under my arm. The room hushed as I began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have something important to share," I began, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "Tonight, I bring to light a betrayal that goes beyond personal pain. It's about trust and how easily it can be shattered." I read aloud the messages, each word a nail in their coffin. Jessica's face turned white, Brad's expression hardening into one of anger and fear. "This is just the beginning," I continued, my voice rising. "We have more, so much more. You've betrayed our trust, and now you'll face the consequences." The room erupted into chaos. People whispered and shouted. Cameras flashed as everyone tried to capture the moment. Jessica and Brad stood frozen, their world crumbling around them. Linda stepped up beside me, her voice strong and clear. "They thought they could get away with it," she said, "but they were wrong." As security escorted them out, I felt a sense of vindication. It wasn't over yet, but this was a step towards justice. Linda and I had come too far to back down now. We had to see this through to the end. The night of the second gala had left a mark on everyone present. The shockwaves from our revelations rippled through the company and our social circles. But the game wasn't over yet. There were still pieces to put together, and the final moves needed to be played. A few days later, I sat in my living room, the hum of the television providing a faint background noise. I was staring at my phone, waiting for Linda's call. We had agreed to meet one last time to review everything we had gathered. Finally, my phone buzzed. "Josh, it's Linda. Can you come over? We need to talk." "Be there in 20 minutes, I replied, grabbing my coat and heading out the door. When I arrived at Linda's house, she greeted me with a tired smile. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let me pass. The living room was a mess of papers, laptops, and coffee cups. It looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Thanks for coming," Linda said, collapsing onto the couch. "We got a lot to go through." I sat down across from her, the weight of the past few weeks heavy on my shoulders. "What did you find?" Linda handed me a stack of papers. "This is everything. Bank statements, emails, text messages. It's all here." I flipped through the documents, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. They really thought they could get away with this, didn't they? "Yes," Linda replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. "But we have everything we need to take them down. The company will see what they've done, and justice will be served." We spent the next few hours going through the evidence, piecing together the final parts of the puzzle. It was painstaking work, but it was necessary. As the clock ticked on, we knew the moment of truth was approaching. The next morning, we arranged a meeting with the company's board of directors. This was it, the final confrontation. Linda and I arrived early, setting up our presentation and ensuring everything was in order. The room was filled with tension, the weight of what we were about to reveal hanging heavily in the air. The board members filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. They knew something big was coming, but they had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. "What we are about to share is of the utmost importance. It involves the actions of two of our colleagues, Jessica and Brad, and the impact their behavior has had on this company." Linda took over, her voice clear and authoritative. "Over the past few weeks, we have gathered evidence of an affair between Jessica and Brad. But this isn't just about personal betrayal. It's about theft, manipulation, and betrayal on a professional level. We laid out the evidence, piece by piece. The bank statements showing embezzlement, the emails plotting against colleagues, the text messages detailing their affair. The board members listened in stunned silence, the gravity of the situation sinking in. When we finished, The chairman of the board, Mr. Reynolds, spoke up. This is serious. Beyond anything we imagined. An external investigation will be launched immediately, and legal action will be pursued against both individuals. As the board members conferred quietly among themselves, the door to the room opened, and Jessica and Brad were escorted in. Their faces were pale, their expressions a mix of fear and defiance. Jessica, Brad, Mr. Reynolds addressed them, his tone cold and formal. You are hereby suspended from your duties, effective immediately. An investigation will follow, and you will be held accountable for your actions. Jessica burst into tears, her facade of confidence crumbling. Please, let me explain, she pleaded, her voice shaking. There's nothing to explain, I said, my voice hard. We've seen the messages, the bank statements. You've betrayed us all. Brad's face turned red with anger. This isn't over, he spat, glaring at me. You'll regret this. I doubt it, Linda replied, her voice steely. You brought this on yourselves. As security escorted them out, I felt a sense of vindication. It wasn't over yet, but this was a significant step toward justice. Linda and I had come too far to back down now. We had to see this through to the end. When we finally left the boardroom, Linda turned to me, her expression softening. We did it, Josh. We really did it. Yeah, I replied, feeling the tension start to ease. But it's not over yet. We still have to deal with the fallout. We will, Linda said confidently. Together, we'll get through this. As we parted ways, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were on the right path. Justice would be served, and maybe, just maybe, we could start to rebuild our lives. The day of the trial dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the somber occasion. I stood in front of the courthouse, my breath visible in the chilly morning air. The grand stone building loomed over me, its imposing presence a reminder of the gravity of what was about to unfold. Linda arrived a few minutes later, her face set in a mask of determination. Are you ready for this? She asked, her voice steady but soft. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Let's get this over with. We walked inside together, the echo of our footsteps bouncing off the marble floors. The courtroom was already filling up with people, colleagues, reporters, and curious onlookers. I spotted Greg in the crowd, giving me a supportive nod. I managed a weak smile in return. We took our seats near the front, waiting for the proceedings to begin. The air was thick with anticipation, everyone whispering among themselves. Finally, the bailiff called the court to order, and the judge entered the room, his stern expression silencing the crowd. All rise, the bailiff announced, the Honorable Judge Collins presiding. Judge Collins took his seat, looking over the room with a critical eye. You may be seated, he said, his voice echoing in the hushed room. We are here today to address the charges brought against Jessica Martin and Brad Thompson. The charges include embezzlement, conspiracy, and breach of trust. The prosecution may begin. Linda and I exchanged a glance as the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Daniels, stood up. He was a tall man with a commanding presence, his voice clear and confident. Your Honor, members of the jury, he began, we are here to present evidence that Ms. Martin and Mr. Thompson not only engaged in a personal affair, but also conspired to steal from their employer and manipulate their colleagues. The evidence will show a clear pattern of deceit and betrayal. He proceeded to lay out the case, presenting the evidence we had painstakingly gathered. Bank statements, emails, text messages, all meticulously organized and damning. As each piece of evidence was displayed, I could see the reactions in the courtroom: shock, disbelief, and anger. Jessica and Brad sat at the defense table, their expressions a mix of defiance and fear. Their attorney, Mr. Johnson, was a seasoned lawyer known for his tenacity. When it was his turn to speak, he wasted no time in trying to discredit the evidence. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Mr. Johnson began, "the evidence presented by the prosecution is circumstantial at best. There is no direct proof that my clients intended to commit these crimes. They have been unfairly targeted and misunderstood." He called witnesses to support his claims, trying to paint Jessica and Brad as victims of a corporate witch hunt. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became that the evidence was overwhelming. During a recess, Linda and I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The weight of the trial was starting to take its toll. "How do you think it's going?" Linda asked, her breath visible in the cold air. "I think the evidence speaks for itself," I replied. "But you never know with these things. We just have to hope the jury sees the truth." As we headed back inside, we ran into Greg. "Hey, Josh, Linda," he greeted us. "Just wanted to say I'm rooting for you guys. It's about time those two faced the consequences." "Thanks, Greg," I said, feeling a bit of the tension ease. "We appreciate the support." The trial continued for several days, each one more draining than the last. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. Mr. Daniels stood up, addressing the jury one last time. "Members of the jury," he said, "you have seen the evidence. You have heard the testimonies. Jessica Martin and Brad Thompson have betrayed the trust placed in them, both personally and professionally. It is now up to you to hold them accountable for their actions." Mr. Johnson gave his closing argument, trying to cast doubt on the prosecution's case, but as he spoke, I could see the wariness in his eyes. He knew the evidence was too strong to ignore. The jury deliberated for several hours, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, they returned, their expressions somber. The foreman stood up, holding the verdict in his hands. "On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendants guilty," he announced. "On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of breach of trust, we find the defendants guilty." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Jessica burst into tears, while Brad's face turned an alarming shade of red. Judge Collins banged his gavel, calling for order. "Jessica Martin and Brad Thompson," he said, his voice stern, "you have been found guilty of all charges. Sentencing will take place at a later date. Court is adjourned." As the courtroom emptied, Linda and I sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. It was over. They had been held accountable for their actions. "Justice is served," Linda said quietly, her eyes glistening with tears. "Yes," I agreed, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. "It is." We walked out of the courthouse together, the cold air hitting us like a reminder of the new beginning ahead. The journey had been long and painful, but it was finally over. We could start to heal, knowing that justice had been done. The weeks following the trial were a blur of emotions. Relief, sadness, and a strange sense of freedom washed over me in waves. Jessica and Brad were facing the consequences of their actions, and while justice had been served, I knew I needed to find a way to move forward. One sunny morning, I found myself sitting in Café Luna, our usual meeting spot. The place had become a refuge during the chaos, and it seemed fitting to return now that the storm had passed. I stared out the window, lost in thought, until I heard a familiar voice. "Josh," Linda greeted me, sliding into the seat opposite mine. "How are you holding up?" I managed a small smile. "I'm getting there. It's strange, you know. After everything, it feels like I'm finally able to breathe again." Linda nodded, her expression soft. "I know what you mean. It's been a roller coaster, but we did it. We got through it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the warmth of the cafe a stark contrast to the chill outside. After a few minutes, Linda spoke again. "So, what's next for you?" she asked, her eyes filled with curiosity. I took a deep breath, considering her question. "I've been thinking about that. I need a fresh start, away from all this. I've been looking at places up north, near the mountains. A small town, a slower pace. I think it could be good for me." Linda smiled, a genuine happiness in her eyes. "That sounds perfect, Josh. You deserve some peace after everything you've been through." "What about you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What are your plans?" She shrugged, a thoughtful look on her face. "I've been considering something similar. Maybe not the mountains, but a change of scenery. I need to find myself again, figure out who I am outside of all this drama." We spent the next hour talking about our dreams and plans, the weight of the past slowly lifting with each word. It was the first time in a long while that I felt hopeful about the future. A few days later, I found myself packing up my house. The process was both cathartic and bittersweet. Each item I placed in a box was a reminder of a life I was leaving behind. But it was also a step towards something new, something better. As I taped up the last box, my phone rang. It was Greg. "Hey Josh," he said, his voice cheerful. "I heard you're moving. Wanted to wish you all the best." "Thanks, Greg," I replied, smiling. "I appreciate that. It's time for a fresh start." "Absolutely," he agreed. "Just wanted to let you know that if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call. We're still friends, no matter where you are." "Thanks, Greg. That means a lot," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'll keep in touch." The next morning, I loaded up the moving truck and took one last look at the house. It was strange to think that this chapter of my life was closing, but I knew it was for the best. As I drove away, the city slowly gave way to open roads and rolling hills. The sense of freedom grew with each mile, the weight of the past falling away. By the time I reached the small town nestled near the mountains, I felt lighter than I had in years. I spent the first few days settling into my new home, unpacking boxes, and getting to know my neighbors. The pace of life was slower here, more peaceful. It was exactly what I needed. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Linda. "Hey Josh, just wanted to let you know that I found a place by the coast. It's beautiful here. Hope you're doing well." I smiled, typing a quick reply. "That's great, Linda. I'm happy for you. Let's catch up soon." As I put my phone away, I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of contentment settle over me. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't scare me. I was ready for whatever came next. The days turned into weeks, and the small town quickly began to feel like home. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping out with various projects and meeting new people. It was rewarding, and it gave me a sense of purpose. One afternoon, as I was painting a mural with some of the local kids, a woman approached me. "Hi, you must be Josh," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Emily. I run the community center." "Nice to meet you, Emily," I replied, shaking her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "All good, I hope," she said with a laugh. "I just wanted to thank you for all your help. The kids love having you around." "It's my pleasure," I said, feeling a genuine warmth in her words. "This place has been a lifesaver for me." As we talked, I realized that I was starting to build a new life here. It wasn't just about escaping the past anymore. It was about creating a future I could be proud of. The seasons change, and with each passing day, the pain of the past faded a little more. I still had my moments of doubt, but they were becoming less frequent. I was healing, slowly but surely. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Hey Josh, just wanted to let you know I'm doing great. I started a new job, and things are finally looking up. How about you?" I smiled, typing a quick reply. "That's wonderful, Linda. I'm doing really well too. Found a sense of peace here. Let's plan a visit soon." As I put my phone away, I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of contentment settle over me. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me to this moment. A new beginning, full of hope and possibility. And for the first time, in a long while, I felt truly at peace.